Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Glad you could be here. The current climate that we're in, sharing and collaboration are paramount within business. We see on a daily basis constantly we're sharing emails, we're sending files, we're posting things to our Dropbox and our Google Drives and many other things. And this is important from a business perspective because the sharing of this information increases our adaptability and our delivery capabilities within business. The corollary to that, though, is that all this data sharing also increases risk for the business. If we think about the nature of information, right, the control of it and the management of information is a significant aspect of business because it creates a business advantage in many aspects. It also creates the opportunity for managing privacy and other things depending upon the types of data that we're sharing. On the other side, though, if we're not managing that properly, we're increasing the risk of lack of privacy or loss of privacy. We're increasing the possibility that this competitive edge could be lost. Right? This can result in either material or non-material losses on the part of the business. Now, one of the things that I've seen in the past in terms, and what we want to focus here is that in the past, encryption can be a very useful tool, absolutely. However, one of the things that encryption has traditionally lacked is the ability to manage and control that data and make that data trackable, controlled, and authorized throughout its entire life cycle. If I encrypt a section of data and I send it to you as a trusted second party, that's great and wonderful, but if you decide that you want to forward it on to somebody, I no longer have control over the information or the ability to manage whether or not you can do that. And if that's acceptable, great. If it's not, then we have a problem. The other aspect is if the recipient of that controlled information does not exercise the proper management controls over it, another party could come in and access the information and be able to take it. And once again, that information is now out of the control of the individual or individuals who originally created it and wanted to manage it. So these traditional encryptions lack that lifecycle control that we need to look at. Now, with that, we need to understand that as we go through our content today, we'll talk about some of the issues around sharing and some solutions that can be leveraged to improve our capabilities to manage that data and control it throughout our access. And that includes who can access it, modify it, and then distribute it, and things like that. So let's get on with some of our data today. I think that's what we're all here for. Today we do live in the digital enterprise. Right? Now, when we say the digital enterprise, one of the things that comes to mind might be the paperless enterprise, and we know that that's not really true. We may have less paper, but we're not paperless. And part of that is that digitization that we've been getting into, and you'll see our friend on the right there, Mr. Bill Gates, in a picture that was done quite a number of years ago when CDs first came out, showing how much data can be managed on a particular CD as compared to paper, and we've come well beyond that in terms of our data density. So, with that, we have to keep that in mind for our data sharing, data transactions. The amount of data that we share, for example, in email today would exceed, a CD's worth in many cases via the various documents. Now, we have to also understand that we need to use technology in this digitization process as a means for advancing our business, right, to creating a technology edge, improving our internal and our external facing processes. When we create that digitization, however, if we do it incorrectly, right, we can actually cause a detriment to our business. So it's important that we create it properly, and part of that is how we manage the data that we're moving and sharing, whether it's taking information from a client via a webmail, or a web form, or whether we're taking it over the phone and then we're entering it into a ticketing system, or whatever the case may be, we have to manage how we're inputting that data, how it's protected in the system, and then ultimately how it's being moved and transferred and then managed and manipulated throughout its life cycle in the business. Now, by looking at digitization and leveraging it properly, we can improve time, efficiency, money, customer satisfaction, all these various aspects. And we're actually going to talk about specific examples of use cases where each of these is affected. But I think that if we think about how the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries improved our capacity to do business, right? The manufacturing techniques that were developed and have been developed since then allowed companies to do more with less or more with the same. Digitization of processes creates that same opportunity, but they also both had their same dangers, right? With the mechanization, we saw many issues of people being injured and other things like that happening with these processes. With the digitization, we're seeing a situation where now data is being shared amongst individuals in many ways, and that can also lead, again, to a lack of privacy or a losing of our business edge. So let's talk about some of those particular aspects. In the use cases internally, first we have business to customer. We can see that ultimately all of us have probably sat down at some point in time to buy a car or to buy a house or to refinance a house or something like that. And these are areas where digitization can provide a huge improvement in our time and our ability to deliver business and so forth. We also see similar improvements in healthcare and government and other aspects of finance. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these approval aspects. And that is specifically about a home, for example. If you go to buy a home, whoever's been there knows you sit down with an advisor, and they say, okay, here's the 32,000 pages of documents that you have to deal with. Please sign here, initial here, and quadruplicate, and so forth. And you spend a lot of time going back and forth. Well, that generates time on both of our parts. Also, you have to do it during their convenience. You're not usually going to do this, at 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night when you've had a chance to take care of your daily business, decompress a little bit, and then take care of business. You have to take time out of your business day, which can often mean for many people time out of work, lost money, lost revenue, etc. And so that's an issue. But with the digitization of these processes now, we can do things out of cycle, if you will, at that 7 or 8 o'clock time frame, and everybody can continue to move business. The same thing we see with healthcare, for example. Many healthcare companies, especially the larger healthcare providers like Kaiser, for example, they will digitize pretty much everything, your drug information, your checkups, your health information, and so forth, and that becomes an interactive digitization process between you and your doctor or doctors in order to maintain your health at the optimal levels. Well, what happens if someone gets access to that information or it's not transferred properly, right? We've seen breaches at all sorts of healthcare companies and insurance companies over the last few years where millions and millions of records have been compromised and then sold off or distributed publicly or whatever, and that creates a huge issue. So we're seeing the digitization, again, those pros and cons. We can get stuff done faster, we can be more efficient, but at the same time we create a significantly higher amount of risk for identity theft and other privacy violations. We also see the internal improvements as well. Now, at the bottom, vacation requests, for example, especially in larger organizations, they've moved away from email and, hey, Bob, can I have next Tuesday off, or hey, Sue, can I have next Friday off, or whatever it is, to having some sort of digital form that you fill out. It goes through the proper approval process, and then it goes into HR, into your record, and so all your time is updated appropriately and so forth. And that's an internal process. Same thing with agreeing on some sort of internal business process or business initiative. It used to be that we would send emails and have an electronic approval that way, and now much of this is done through project management tools so that each individual has the opportunity to approve and make comments, etc., and then move forward. So, as long as that information stays internal, it's great, and it's a fantastic opportunity to improve our means of doing business and so forth. One of the other things that's important to understand about digitization, over 40% of the world's population is now on the Internet, which means a very large percentage, let's say 35% or more, are using the Internet to advance business needs, and whether that's from their home perspective, paying bills, etc., or just sending email or interacting with schools and physicians and so forth. There's a huge number of people now that are exchanging information across an essentially public forum, right? The Internet is a public network. Granted, hopefully they're using HTTPS or TLS to be able to secure the data in transit, and then they're expecting and really in many cases requiring the organization at the far end to protect that data from interlopers or access or inappropriate use. And that we're seeing that though the transport of that information has been very secure, and over time we're seeing still millions of records. Last year there were over 1 billion records that was 1 billion with a B. Records that were compromised via some fashion, and that includes anything from an email address, which has various levels of significance to individuals, but can have privacy implications, all the way through Facebook accounts and personal health records. Personal health records being the most valuable from a theft perspective because they contain all the detail about your life, essentially, that a hacker or an attacker would need to be able to compromise your identity, including your health details, your address, your social security number, etc. So we'd like to take an attendee poll real quick. So I'm going to hand it off to Raleigh, and this is so we can kind of compare information that we've collected in the past to information here with our live participants. And the question is your organization concerned enough with information loss or leakage and exposure due to file sharing and other collaboration activities to be investigating how to better manage or control that data? Go ahead, Raleigh.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'll leave the poll question open for a few moments. Please select one of the following options. Yes, no, but I think we should, or the last option is no, and we really don't see it as a significant issue at this time. We appreciate your feedback on this poll question. As I mentioned at the beginning, David and Kevin will be concluding today's event by taking your questions. You can log those anytime using the Q&A functionality located on the WebEx panel. Also, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow that will include some additional resources, including information on how to request a demo from Sirius. So I hope you will check that out. The poll is now closed, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, David, to discuss the results.
Super. Well, we appreciate everyone who participated. The results are yes is 100%, so that kind of knocks the rest of them out. And that's good. We're glad that folks are interested in that. And I want to show you as a comparison, 100% versus 42%. So at the bottom there, you'll see 42% of organizations that we polled said they have a project identified to invest in stronger security controls and technology within the next year. So there's 42% of this, let's say this 100%, that are actually on their way to trying to do something about that. And what are they trying to deal with is the upper number, the 75% that believe they have a high to very high risk of data loss or leakage. The thing that concerns me here is the delta between the 75% that identify that they believe they have a high to very high risk, but only 42% have a project identified to actually invest in stronger controls. So with that, you're talking 33 points of difference between the problem and the solution, if you will. And I think that says something, right? We all know that budgets and time are limited, but I think that we all need to be looking at means to be able to better control and manage that data because the problem is only going to get worse over time. One of the things that we're seeing from a future or a current perspective is there are very common methods of data loss and leakage. Now, the first one is file sharing. 97% believe that this is an issue in their organization. And whether that's, again, through a Dropbox or a Google Drive or whatever methodology that's being out there, files are being put out there. And we're assuming in most cases, the vast majority of cases, these are for benevolent and benign reasons. I'm just trying to get my job done. I want to make sure that my person that I'm working with on the other side has the data they need and so forth. But it's being put out there. And in most cases, we're finding that this is being used across some sort of personal data sharing method, right? It's not a corporate data sharing method that can be controlled and managed. It's using some kind of, again, personal Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. Now, 82% said we've emailed data to the wrong recipient. I'm pretty sure that everybody here, at least 82% of us, would be able to say the same thing. Good old autocomplete or autocorrect in our drop-down email, or we're doing too many things at once. We type in a piece of information, and boom, we send it off, and it's gone to the wrong person. Oh, crud, what do I do now? In most cases, it's very benign, and you can say, hey, didn't mean to send it to you. Can you just delete it? Everything's cool. In other cases, there is a real risk of exposure, and it could be that you're dealing with two competing firms, and you sent the wrong information, and now if the person at the other end decides that they're not ethical or moral, that they're going to open that and use it to their advantage, and you have no control whatsoever now that it's in their inbox. Lastly, 82% said files inappropriately shared outside the company. So regardless of the means, 82% said somebody shared data with someone they shouldn't have shared it with. There's not really an indication in the data on maliciousness in this particular aspect, but Bob, Susie, George, whoever sent something to somebody else, and said, hey, check this out, right? And they may have had, again, a totally benign aspect, but then again, it could also be a malicious aspect. And that's a very, very large number to think that folks are taking liberties with our company data and sharing it with other people inappropriately. And that could be whether inside or outside the company, by the way, but it's outside of the appropriate disclosure group for that data. And that's a big concern. So each one of these is an issue, and again, I'm sure we've all experienced the email to the wrong recipient, and it could have been, again, very trivial or not. But the point is that once you release that data in any one of these scenarios, and there were more than this, but in any one of these, that data takes on a life of its own. The recipient, it's now totally up to their ethics on whether or not they're going to delete it, read it and delete it, or read it, pass it on, post it on the internet, whatever. And that's all of those have happened to organizations throughout time based on these types of accidents. So it's a real and growing issue. So where are we today? 50% of organizations believe they have regular confidential data leakage. So now we're talking about a specific type of data, not just information that shouldn't go outside. It could be a non-public, non-disclosed information in a generic email. However, this is specifically confidential information that is not meant for public disclosure or broad disclosure, and that's a huge number, right? Half of the companies out there that responded said we do have a problem with that. 70% said, well, you know what? We believe that our people would use better controls if they had the capability and were empowered to do so. The problem that we're seeing is that with the companies that are either using current controls or investigating, the amount of business friction that can be imparted into them is a significant issue. We're going to talk about some of those. Both Kevin and I are within the presentation today. But I think this is an important aspect because friction within the business process is a significant issue. Well, we get paid to do our jobs, to produce our widgets, to create files, whatever it is that we do. And if we're involved in an electronic process of some kind, having to step outside of that process to employ more security is a significant pain. And whether it's emotional or physical pain, it's an issue, right? And so we all know personally, whether we want to say it or not, if there's a process for security that gets in our way of doing our jobs, we will generally do our best to circumnavigate, circumvent, et cetera, bypass it so that we can get our jobs done. Because that's all we want to do. It's not a malicious aspect. It's just I need to get this stuff done before I go home, and I want to not have to worry about it. And so that creates an issue. Was it 31% of our productive time during the day is spent in email? So if that's where your process originates, going outside of email to encrypt a document or do something else to protect it is going to take time, right? And in each one of those 5 minutes, if you will, add up over the course of the day. And if you have 35 transactions at 5 minutes apiece, right, that's 160 minutes if I did my math right off the top of my head. And so that's a good amount of time. That's a couple hours out of your day, a little more than that, right, that cause a problem. So we need to find ways to empower people to do their jobs with better security. Oop, didn't work. Let me try that again. There we go. All right, so what are some of our inhibitors? I think this is says a lot, right? So 85% at the top there. 85% of users rated lack of ease of use or user friction as their greatest inhibitor. That's what we were just talking about. So 85% of you said, hey, this is a problem. I just can't keep stepping outside or doing multiple things to get this job done, and this is why security is a problem. And so now the security guys come back to you and say, hey, we're going to threaten you with something else or more problems or bigger this or whatever it is, and you have a disgruntled user, you have a potentially toxic work environment, and so that's not going to work for us, right? We need to figure out a way to keep that friction down. 76% said, hey, the solutions were prone to user error. I thought I was supposed to do A, B, C, but I was really supposed to do B, C, D, and so the data was not protected effectively, and so all this stuff that I was doing that I thought was, for my benefit really wasn't. And I think that's a very large number. So we know that users aren't perfect, and also we also know that the users are under a high amount of pressure to get a lot of stuff done during the day, whatever their widgets are that they have to produce. And the faster we have to go, the more prone to mistakes we are. And so if we have a security solution that's complex and or makes us step outside of our normal process, that's going to be prone to errors, and it's not going to protect the data the way that we think it should. The last one, 81% said negative workflow impacts were their biggest issue. And I think that kind of combines aspects of both of those as well as other factors, right? If I change the workflow because it's a security issue, then that creates a problem. And I've never seen a security process that was introduced that significantly reduced the amount of work that had to be involved in a process. Right? There are solutions that add very little to, let's say, almost no overhead, but adding security to something is very rarely going to reduce or minimize that workflow even further. So we have to figure out a way to introduce security into the workflow that is seamless and allows that user to just, let's say, click a button or do something very simple in order to manage the security. And if we can do that, we get back to that other 70% that would be able to adopt it and use it. We just don't want to add that overhead. So I think each of these is a significant issue when we're dealing with security. Let's talk some real numbers here. So as a specific example, e-signatures. I talked a little bit about this in the loan process earlier, but I'm going to go a little more in depth with it now. So one of the processes I mentioned before of whatever type of loan that we're taking out is sitting down and signing paperwork, and it's arduous and we hate it. However, in the last few years, we've seen things where a vendor will deploy a system whereby they send you an email, and you in your email it says, click on this link in order to authorize whatever this transaction is or whatever the document process is. And let's say that's for a car loan, right? So you're going to, yes, I want this loan, and here's all the things I have to sign and check, and I filled everything out. But with that process, in most cases, this electronic signature is not equivalent in security to a true digital signature. Now, when you use the term digital signature, that involves security, both authorizing and validating of the sender of the document and authorizing and validating the recipient. And so both know that the other is who they say they are, and the transaction has been conducted appropriately and is therefore secure. In the common solution today, what happens is you get that email, so that solution is relying first upon the security of your email. You click on the link, there's no other real security there. You might have to put in some piece of data, but it's not a secret of any kind. It's just something to further identify you throughout the process, that paperwork. Usually that's the case of, please use your mouse to draw your signature as best you can, and we know how well that works for most of us. Or you can select from the list of these different types and styles of signatures so that you have a representation of your signature. Now, these are not secure, right? These are not true digital signatures, though they are electronic representations that may fall under the definition of a general e-signature. But they don't provide security or data non-repudiation on the count of the sender or the recipient. So at this point, you've now signed this document with this tool, and it goes off to wherever it's supposed to go, and everybody takes that as approval. The problem is that really isn't authoritative, if you will. If it came down to a problem in the process, either side could challenge the validity of that particular signature. We know how often emails get compromised, so from the amount of spam that we get from our friends and so forth. And, oh, did you send me this link about some drug or whatever? No, I didn't send it to you. Sorry, my email is compromised, something like that. But if they can get into our emails, then they can also get access to these types of key documents and authorize transactions that we didn't. So that's a problem. So we do need to look at solutions that will validate sender, validate recipient, and therefore create a binding trust relationship. So getting into the data here now, after that explanation, true e-signatures do both ensure the sender identity and the data integrity, and also the recipient identity and data integrity. At the bottom there, using e-signatures over paper can reduce turnaround time by 80%. Okay, that's huge, and we know that if we go to the office to sign that paperwork, it's going to take us not travel time as well as sitting time and then return travel time. So that can be hours of time, at least, let's say, 2 hours of time, maybe more. However, if we can do it via a true digital signature process at that 7 or 8 o'clock at a convenient time, we don't have to worry about travel time. We sit down at the computer. We take 5 minutes to log in and get to where we need to be. We authorize the paperwork over the course of 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then we're done, right? So we've taken a 2-hour process and we've made it less than a half an hour process, and that's not a great ratio from the 80% perspective, but you get the idea, right? I just kind of made those time frames up, but the 80% is a factual number done based on research, so we can a huge amount of time. If it's a home loan, you're talking much longer time than you would, for example, a car loan or something else. E-signature services can reduce document handling costs by as much as $20 per document. Now, if you think of all the documents, those little stapled groups of paper or the paperclip groups of paper, each one of those is a document that has to be created, printed, shipped, signed, reshipped, and so forth, right? So now you're talking about a fairly large expense, both in time and actual money put out for shipping and paper and so forth, versus the e-signature process where there's no paper involved, unless the receiving party at one end or the other decides that, oh yeah, I do want a paper copy of this as opposed to an electronic copy. It makes me feel better because I'm used to it, and I'm going to print it out. That's a choice, but it's not a requirement based on the process. And then lastly, you have e-signatures, right? E-signatures can reduce customer friction, right, because I don't have to drive back and forth. I don't have to sit down and wait for you and so forth. And then they reduce the time requirements. And so ultimately, you're increasing customer loyalty by as much as 5 times. So, and I know from my perspective, when I find a lender of some kind that uses a true e-signature process that I don't have to go back and forth, and that provides the proper sender and recipient authentication and data integrity, right? I want to stick with that particular sender just from my own personal perspective, because then I don't have to worry about security, being a security person, and I don't have to worry about spending lots of time being a Joe average normal person. So I think all of these issues kind of come around with a specific e-signature issue, but I also want to look at the bigger picture as well, and that the conversation that we're having isn't just about e-signatures, right? It's about securing data throughout its life cycle. E-signatures are one aspect of that, but there are other means to do that as well. And that's what we need to be looking at as we look at our business processes and cycle throughout the digitization process. So I'm going to hand it over to Kevin now for his part of the presentation. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks, David. Much appreciated. And first of all, on behalf of the entire Sirius team and all the attendees on this webinar, please extend a warm and grateful thank you to the entire team at EMA for all the work they did in researching and creating such an informative and really a compelling presentation. Thank you so much. For the folks on the call, as David mentioned, my name is Kevin Froese. I'm the Global Vice President of the Sales and Marketing team here at Sirius. The reason the EMA team and Sirius partnered together to deliver this content and why I'm here is really to share the observations and impressions that we've gathered from our over decade of working in this field as a stakeholder in a conversation about securing the new digital enterprise. And as that conversation has progressed over the last decade, we've seen it evolve, particularly through the lens of e-signatures. We've seen this movement from agreements to acceptance. And building off the core premise in David's presentation, the drivers of e-signature adoption are lowering the costs associated with managing agreements, reducing the agreement acceptance time, as well as lowering the inherent friction in the signature process. And through this, we've seen the emergence of a new model for e-signature throughout the industry and whatever vertical you look at. And it's being referred to as click to acknowledge. This is really an acceptance-based approval that is designed to be ordered and trackable. I mean, if you think of any email that you've sent, do you agree? Please confirm. These are now starting to evolve to a little bit more of a formal acknowledgement and leading the adoption in terms of existing workflows beyond what I would call business-to-business agreements are internal approvals. These are things such as vacation requests. Also moving externally, we've seen things like confirmation of meeting action items and the joint acknowledgement of documents, the joint acknowledgement in the sales process of things like quotations or scope of work documents, images. A good example of that would be in the insurance space where an adjuster takes a photo of something in the field and wants to have that acknowledged by all the parties involved in a specific claim, and even just messages in email. So these new use cases enable the use of e-signature tools in new areas of the enterprise beyond what we've traditionally seen, which is the sales organization, the procurement organization, or the legal organization. We are now seeing deployments in the human resources department, in finance and operations, in client services, quality assurance, and more, just to name a few. As a result of the higher adoption, we're also seeing more and more potentially sensitive information being attached and shared through e-signature system. And this presents a new, greater risk that the enterprise really needs to be aware of. And that's specifically that the exposure of unencrypted documents and unauthenticated links over plain email, which can be distributed to unintended or unwelcome participants, really have the potential to compromise the e-signature workflow. So what are the consequences of this unchecked e-signature risk? Let's peel the onion and explore this in a little bit more detail. The lack of encryption and exposed links makes organizations vulnerable to data leakage, and in particular in cases of enterprises that are governed by regulations such as HIPAA in healthcare or FINRA in financial services. This opens the door to the theft and exploitation of personally identifiable information or non-compliance. And of course, either of those comes with risk of brand, increased legal costs, potential fines, etc. Moreover, in an environment where a document can be accessed by an unintended signatory and or forwarded to an unauthorized signatory for completion, the integrity, authority, and binding effect of an agreement can be subject to challenge. Now, as a person who deals regularly with security and IT folks, the standard reaction to manage these risks is one of three things. One, ignore it and simply rely on the messaging from some of the traditional email signature providers that implore the users, do not share this email with anyone. We would argue that that's not common, and that's obviously not a best practice. But another approach would be to overlay a complex PKI infrastructure with certificate authority, and we've seen lots of organizations do that. Another option is to purchase either on-demand, per transaction, or an increased threshold of product from the traditional e-signature providers that can start to get costs over $150 per user per month. So as you see these usage being scaled beyond sales, beyond legal, beyond procurement, and into these other departments, multiply that $150 a month by these new users, and as you can imagine, the costs can get pretty unwieldy. So with those last two options, while they are effective, the inherent cost has the impact of restricting company adoption. We're not putting the right tools into the hands of the people who need it. Or if we go with the overlaying the complex PKI infrastructure, the complexity associated with that tends to frustrate users, introduces friction into the workflow, and ultimately it limits use. So we argue at Sirius that there's another way. In order for this path to be considered by the digital enterprise, the following considerations need to be taken into account. So first and foremost, of course, is security. The paramount consideration is to ensure the security and fidelity of personal and enterprise information is secured both at rest and in transit. Next is to consider the impact of data residency. Global enterprises need to pay close attention to where documents are hosted and account for the cross-border exchange of information. And last but not least, security overlays that introduce user-perceived friction pave the way for the introduction of phantom IT. And how we define the term phantom IT is the use of non-IT supported applications or workflows. The biggest visible example of this would be employees using a free Dropbox account to share files with customers. And phantom IT candidly represents the worst case scenario for the enterprise. You are incurring the full cost of security, but because the users that are intended to use that technology aren't using it, you're not accruing any of the security benefits. And as David pointed out, 85% of organizations are concerned about usability when it comes to security solutions. And so that's a pretty high standard to make sure that usability doesn't get in the way of good security. The next pillar is authority. And in the simplest terms, we mean you are who you say you are, both the sender and the recipient, and both of you are signing the correct version of the document. The way this is achieved is through advanced authentication, which lends itself to non-repudiation for all signees and the document or content itself. So how this works is typically on the sender side, the sender, whether it's integration with single sign-on, that really serves to authenticate the sender. They are who they say they are. On the recipient side, there's typically a registration or password access to authenticate the recipient. And in many cases, there's a best practice to further augment this with a PIN-based access. And then on the document itself, we need to ensure that embedded e-signature certificates authenticate the content for the right version that was signed by both the sender and the recipient. The last two pillars, in the interest of time, I'll group into sort of one description, which is visibility and control. And you may not think of these as essential to the digital enterprise, but without an ability to really know where a document is in an electronic workflow or to control that workflow, your organization is subject to the risk of data or document leakage. As well, as I mentioned previously, it introduces a risk of questionable signature authority. So an essential part of visibility is the availability of status information related to the delivery and actions throughout the workflow. Not just the signature, that's of course important, but the entire workflow. Real-time alerts and notifications associated with each of those stages should really allow for business actions to be taken by the right time with the right person to the right person, while after the fact, the on-demand availability of historical statuses should make for an auditable workflow, and this content should be available at any time for e-discovery. And of course, a lot of enterprises are now deploying these kind of solutions and sending them through a third party or leveraging an API. But this approach at no time should negate any of the items that we've already discussed: security, authority, visibility, and control. And last but certainly not least, while these are pillars, we need to have a wrapper around all of them, which is they need to be considered through the lens of ease of use. Otherwise, organizations will have to manage the risk of phantom IT deployments, as I mentioned earlier, or deal with the business consequences of a reduced speed of business or a prolonged transaction time, or be in a situation where they're exposed via compliance because they've got a non-standard or a non-compliant process. Now, all of this may sound very theoretical, so I thought I'd kind of go from the atmosphere to the earth and bring it down to our level and give you a bit of an example of somebody that we've worked with, someone we ran across recently that is sort of a major global publicly traded medical device manufacturer. And they were really seeking to transition from what was a very paper and postage-dependent workflow to a digital workflow. I think you'll see as we go through this example both the benefits of the digital transformation as well as how the four needs we previously discussed really help them make that transition. So let's start with the challenge. In this case, the medical device manufacturer, they were sending out information to customers via FedEx. Now this information were notifications to fulfill the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, requirements for product notifications and recalls. So if you think of a medical device manufacturer, they have a product out in the field that is either at a distributor in use in a hospital or in the hands of a patient. Something recall related may come up, and they have the challenge of getting the right information to the right people quickly, making sure that information got there with authority and the ability to track it all the way through the workflow. So as you can imagine, doing this manual was a very slow and expensive process, and there was no way of knowing, other than a physical signature for registered mail, if the information was received by the correct recipient. Now, what the organization needed was a secure way to send confidential product information in a way that could be tracked, in a way that could be controlled, in a way that could be signed by the recipient with verification. Now, as they explored this challenge, they looked at a number of different solutions. They had originally looked at creating or using a standard e-signature solution from one of the leading e-signature vendors, and then overlaying on top of that an expensive PKI infrastructure. As they trialed that, they eventually found that the solution was really just too cumbersome and at scale was too expensive. And ultimately, it lacked the final pillar, which was it didn't have the tracking information that they needed. So without that PKI infrastructure, they would lack the support for the HIPAA regulations that, as a medical device manufacturer, they were governed by. And they needed to ensure that they were protecting the information on both the sender and the recipients, as well as the content. In addition, the existing e-signature solutions would not support their enterprise or their global security requirements. So those things being, they wanted to make sure that they were able to apply their own encryption salt to the deployment so that they had some level of security control and command as opposed to a multi-tenant deployment. And lastly, the marketing team really got involved and saw this as this communication as an opportunity to reflect their brand. And so the existing e-signature solutions would not support the company branding they needed, and they felt, if they needed to send a document under the e-signature provider's brand, it would confuse a lot of their end users. So the ability to brand it, apply their own SSL certificate so that the URLs were aligned with the organization was critically important. Excuse me. So the solution, using a secure encryption and secure e-signature solution that we provide here at Sirius that was fully integrated into their email system, the company was able to implement an electronic workflow that improved dramatically upon their paper and postage workflows, which included securely sending information to their customers with full tracking and control of information, as well as an auditable and non-repudiable e-signing process without the need for an expensive PKI infrastructure. From a business perspective, the result was the new digital workflow increased the speed of notification from greater than 10 days or more to virtually instantaneous. It increased the accuracy and validation rate of the messages from, sub 50% to almost 90%, reducing significant amount of unintended or, unchecked risk in terms of the ability for a receiver to say, I didn't get this at a later date. And it saved them, financially, more than $600,000 per year through the reduced delivery expense and increased productivity. So let's take a little bit of a look at the solution and how they did this, at least at a 50,000-foot level. They introduced the Sirius Secure e-signature product suite. This is a suite that, as David mentioned earlier, with 31% of employees' available productive hours already in email, it was really important that the solution was applied to where the employees already were. So it was completely integrated into their email workflow, whether they were leveraging email on the desktop, web, or mobile. As an enterprise organization, they needed to have the product integrated in other areas of their business, whether it be their SSO environment, whether it be their archiving and e-discovery environment, as well as the ability leveraging a dedicated cloud service, which allowed them to overlay other global security benefits such as their own encryption salt. And all of this, really, the transition is managed through a user experience that is embedded within the email workflow that we call the delivery slip. And I'm going to spend just a few moments introducing you to the delivery slip. Now, what you're looking at here, just a little bit of a screen geography or a UI geography, is on the left-hand side, we have what we call the pre-send delivery slip, and on the right-hand side, we have the post-send delivery slip. Both, again, are embedded inside an email window when either drafting or receiving a secure email. It's vertical and embedded vertically within the email window. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go between two separate slides here to kind of show you what it looks like. So let's start on the left-hand side. So first of all, being able to control let's call it the delivery and security experience, manage some of the policies, the ability to restrict the forwarding of a secure e-signature document. As David mentioned, anything that is sent in open email with a link can be copied, pasted, and sent to anybody else. this has the ability to restrict that. We talk about advanced authentication, which is adding a unique password to a secure e-signature workflow that, again, serves to deliver a non-repudiated document experience. Going to the bottom of the delivery slip or the pre-send delivery slip, we see that we can attach a secure any kind of document. Whether it be a contract, which is great, but spreadsheet, an image, even the message itself, regardless of size, up to 5 gigabytes, without overloading, the recipient's email box, can simply be dragged, dropped, and attached to within an email to kick off a secure e-signature experience. Oops, went the wrong way. Sorry about that. Let me go back. In a post-send world, and now we're looking at the right-hand side and back to the top, we see that we have the ability to track the status of the message, wherever it is in the life cycle. So that document or that image that's been sent out for a secure e-signature, has it been received by the recipient? Has it been replied to, signed? Has it been forwarded to somebody else if we allowed it to be forwarded to? Has it been printed? Has it been deleted? And again, all of those statuses have optional notification to the desktop or a mobile device so that the sender can, at the speed of business, engage with the recipient in a way that moves the business need forward. And then, of course, last but not least is control. I think, David's presentation talked about the fact that 81% of data leakage is occurring through the, accidental sending of, either it be the wrong information to the right person, maybe it's the right information to the wrong person, or in the worst case scenario, the wrong information to the wrong person. The ability to securely recall that information from source, even if it's been forwarded to somebody else. And those are some of the things that the delivery slip allows our users to do. So in closing, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this, I know we only talked about it for maybe 2 minutes or so. We can spend a little bit more time learning a little bit more about your business and how we might be able to help you through a sort of a 15-minute discovery and demo. At the conclusion of that, we're happy to extend to you a free 30-day trial, no limitations on the product. You have the ability to use all the features, secure e-signatures, message control, large file transfer, etc. And we can get you up and running. This isn't one of those solutions where it's a complex PKI infrastructure. We don't have to manage MX records. You can be up and running in less than 5 minutes. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, my contact information is there. And with that, I'll transfer it back over to Rally to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I will also include Kevin's email in the follow-up email for those of you who are interested in exploring this opportunity further. Kevin and David, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions, and I'll let whomever wants to take the question to take it. And I know typically, if you want to piggyback or provide additional insight, please feel free. The first question is, what are the issues of data residency you mentioned related to exchanging e-signature documents, and how would they impact regulatory requirements?
Do you want to catch that, Kevin, or do you want me to hit it?
Well, how about I hit it and you add color? Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
So first of all, I think we all need to acknowledge that there are differences in the data protection laws from country to country. That needs to be acknowledged from the get-go.
Absolutely.
And if we're sending documents for e-signature from one country into another, you have a change in data protection laws, and those documents may not be protected in the same way as your home country, and therefore you may be potentially violating the data protection laws you're supposed to be complying with. Some solutions, Sirius included, we give customers the choice of data residency, where their hosted system resides, and that really does serve to simplify the issue in a lot of ways. And let me just, I know the EU and the UK departure from the EU has been, a hot topic in the last few days, but there's some sort of new and relevant data related to that. In a recent survey of EU countries, it was found that 74% of the businesses in those countries were using a cloud service that did not uphold the EU Data Protection Initiative. So it's a real issue, and it's certainly something that needs to be considered.
No, I think you're right there, especially, for example, that last point that you brought out is that even the folks that that are in the EU and were trying to operate within its data protection laws weren't doing so. So then when you add the complexity and the issues around inter-country transport of that data and data residency, that's a big issue. And so I think a key aspect of that is also making sure where your core data is residing within any service, any type of cloud service or other provided or managed service.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you both. Another question that came in is, you noted that negative impacts on workflows was one of the biggest inhibitors to security integration. What are some of the ways IT organizations can ensure business groups that relevant security solutions won't affect their existing workflows? What are you two seeing?
David, I'll let you kick that one off.
So that sounded like a long, multi-part question there. So Raleigh, hit me with the first part again, because it was definitely a multi-part question.
Well, it's what are some of the ways IT organizations can ensure business groups that relevant security solutions won't affect their existing workflows?
Okay, I think the simplest answer to that is it's a matter of effectively identifying your requirements prior to purchasing solution, and whether that's a multi-phase process, right? So you're going to talk to the business owners, the process owners, and so forth, and make sure that all those relevant parties are bought in, and that you understand what their requirements are, and that's up to the gotta-haves, the wanna-haves, and the would be nice-to-haves, right? If you think about it from that perspective, and then once you've identified those requirements, you have to do some sort of proof of concept or testing to make sure that each of the solutions that you're looking at for evaluation meets some level of those requirements. What I've done in the past is created a spreadsheet, not having a formal project tool that I could manage that on, but I created a spreadsheet, listed out everybody's requirements, and then prioritize them, and then ultimately determine which of the solutions affected each of these, and then came back to the owners, the project owners, and said, here's what we meet. Which of these is most effective for you? Because none of the solutions, more than likely, none of the solutions is going to meet 100% of the requirements. If it does, fantastic, and there'll probably only be one that ever does that. Without doing that, let's say each of them meets 80% of the requirements. The question is it 80% of the have-to-haves, and then 10 and 10 of the others, or 10 and 50? It doesn't matter. Or is it 50% of the have-to-haves and 100% of the others, right? But obviously the have-to-haves are more important, and that's why getting those requirements there, ranking them, weighting them, and ultimately testing against them is going to be the only way to ensure that you've got the optimal solution for your workflow and your environment. Anything else, Kevin?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Great, Kevin. I do have a specific question for you. This audience member wants to know, providing users with the ability to put, for example, a forward freeze on their messages is quite powerful. This could have cultural implications in user communities, such as the dysfunction related to blind copy. Any comments on how this could be positively influenced?
That's a really good question. Well, let me first try to color this through maybe a market-specific use case. Recently, the American Bar Association, which is the professional association that governs lawyers, published a white paper that really talked about how the notice of confidentiality on an email signature, if you've ever received a lot of standard email footers have this, which is it's confidential, do not distribute. Well, it's kind of akin to knowing what your Christmas present is before you open it. Once you've opened the email address or the email that you've been sent, and you see that footer, it's too late. The message has already been opened, so it's kind of after the fact. So forward freeze is one of those features that really users have leveraged to protect the fidelity, protect the confidentiality of their email beyond a simple let's call it email footer-based notification of please do not distribute. we haven't had any sort of response from any of our recipients that has been negatively received. I think if that was the nut of the question. On the contrary, we've seen this particularly in sales organizations that are sending out quotations or sending out product information where, you know what, we want to send you this information. We want to ensure that this information is really only for you and it's not being sent to a competitor or sent to somebody that's used to, in some way, maybe try to leverage the information against us. I'm not sure if I really answered the question exactly as it was intended, but that's some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace.
Kevin, let me hit on the other part of that around the dysfunction of blind copy, right? A solution that manages access and control of data inherently removes the capability to blind copy somebody unless you're going to then make them part of the authorized recipients group, at which point if the solution itself shows everybody that is eligible to read that message, it's kind of a moot point to make them a blind copy, because even if Bob was blind copied, if I can look at the list and say, hey, look, why was Bob on this? Bob didn't get this. Right now you've opened up that can of worms, if you will. So it kind of depends on the solution and how easy it is to see who all is an authorized recipient of the message or the content by the recipients of that message. So in terms of that dysfunction, it does eliminate the ability to blind copy people. However, on the other side, it does not eliminate the ability for me to send a separate message to that individual outside of the others, and make that individual an individual recipient authorized to receive that message in a different thread. That also would come back to the solution and who has access to be able to see ultimately who has access to the combined content of all the threads.
Thank you both. And we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and conclude today's event. I know there were some questions we were not able to get to. I will be sure to forward those on to Kevin and David. And again, I invite you to check out the follow-up email from EMA tomorrow. That will include the on-demand playback, a PDF of the speaker slides, and this information on how to request a demo. Thanks so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.